Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Politics of Self live Google Hangout. In our previous Hangout, we talked about what is politics and what is our relationship to it, and it's in our interest to become actually involved in it instead of passively involved. And an important point of doing that is to get informed and keep abreast of the news. So, how do we do that in a situation where our media is largely controlled? How do we cut through the biases and find some common sense in the media? So that's what we'll be discussing today. My name is Kelly. I'm coming at you live from Seattle area in Washington, and with me co-hosting today is Joe from the Los Angeles area in California. Hi, Joe.
Hello.
And also with us is Joanna from London in the UK. Hi, Joanna.
Hello, everybody.
All right, so as always, we have the Q&A section for our participants, our viewers, to participate in questions and comments that you'd like to share or ask throughout the duration of this Hangout. So get those in and we will respond to you. So, getting started, let's start out with having a look at what is the media and how does it currently exist? How does it function? What is it? So who'd like to take us off with that one?
Okay, I'll go. So, media to me is basically the common response to media, if you ask somebody on the street, would be newspapers or magazines or TV shows, the news. But I tend to think of media as anything at all that has space within your mental map. Let me explain what that means. Anytime you walk into a store, you are inundated with advertising. You are inundated with a kind of consumer culture. And this might not always be in the form of a poster or a commercial or a radio ad. It's the way that the store itself is set up to entice you. Now, this is backed by social science. All of this is backed by a deliberate attempt to capture your attention and to get you to react a certain way. That, to me, is media. That is a systematic approach to capturing your attention and within capturing that, leading you to a pre-decided conclusion. And this, in the case of a store, they want you to make purchases, and they want you to feel good about the products that they have, so they'll arrange things to that effect. Now, I think it's important to keep in mind to not so narrowly define media to only newspaper agencies or TV shows, though today's we'll be talking about that specifically. But I just wanted to open that up, and that is kind of my take on media.
Yeah, that's a great point in that it's not just necessarily the news that you see on TV, on a TV program, but it's all around us in all the kinds of messages that we receive on a daily basis. So, Joanna, anything to add to that?
Yes, I mean, these days I've been, well, from my experience, I've been noticed that media, when it comes to the various different channels that we receive the information from, it's almost like replacing formal education, parenting, friendships. And that is something to highlight, and as to ourselves to recognize the influence that certain news have upon us, and how is that affecting our own decisions, not only as consumers, but in our own lives, how we project that. And it's not a coincidence that we see lots of violence and specific words in various different channels, and it kind of models our way of living, our way of seeing the world. And so it's kind of media has been the medium to share information, and no longer the messages have been actually that relevant, but when they do, we kind of recognize that they're not for the benefit, like the majority of them are not for the benefit of who we are as humanity and as human beings to learn and to progress, but actually kind of makes us a little bit dumb and as if we don't care about each other, and creates a little bit of separation, especially when you talk about different countries and how there's this inner competition of different news and how those news come about. So we're going to talk about that, but it's also as our responsibility to question why is that certain topic in that specific country in this time becomes the news, and why another relevant information is not, and what it makes it in the cover of a news page, or even to be just mentioned in the news channel. So yeah, I think that has been my experience of actually questioning how that influences, and it kind of also have been shaping who I am until I decide to, oh, wait a second, let me now find my own sources and ask people instead of taking information for granted.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it's kind of in a way has become sort of more of a point of entertainment, where it's what you talk about at the water cooler, or but none of it has any actual real relevance or any value, or actually educates you in some way to take any kind of directive stance within what's going on. So let's look at this a little deeper in terms of, you know, how does the media actually exist? You know, how is this in some ways deliberate, that the media is not there as an effective information tool, but is more there to sort of create public opinion? Who would like to take that one on?
Well, I can start by at least mentioning there's like this what is called like a phenomena, which is the consolidation of media, and by that is who actually owns the media, where does the specific organization belongs, where the funds are coming through, and who are the board of directors of that specific organization. And that will obviously influence the editing. So the editor of a specific magazine or a news channel, they will be under a certain control by who owns it. If it goes in a direction that kind of supports the stance of that bigger and larger organization or a corporation. So that's kind of an illusion of choice when we have so many different channels, so many of different sources of information, but they're actually under the same umbrella. And that's how everything works in today's society, where we have this illusion of choice. And for that, I can start at least by showing you a very simple chart that, well, this one is not specific to the media, but it's specific to the actual manufacturing of products. So everything that we consume comes from 10 major corporations and groups, which means there's a pattern. If we think that one product is not good for us, maybe the other one is not going to be either, but it's just using a different branding. And the same it goes with the news. And that's to be aware of that idea that we have, it's an illusion of choice. And it same comes to the mainstream media. So here we're talking more about the mainstream media. And a very similar pattern you find in international media owners, where you have 5 bigger corporations, and then it will influence everything: TV station, radio station, content production. It goes even to the cinema, of course. So being aware of this system in itself, it's really important, so we can kind of question. And when you're reading a newspaper, or if you're reading an article, you try to find out, okay, what is the starting point? Is this, what political affiliation does this magazine is connected to? Because it's going to definitely influence the content and how we are going to read it. But, well, having said that, then in terms of how it works, it doesn't necessarily need to be this way. This is how, in a way, the news information and this channel have survived in a system of competition. This is like the byproduct of the system that we, as human beings, have been accepted throughout these last centuries. Well, at least this specific to this, since we have technology in place. So this, hopefully, this gives like an overview of what we're dealing with. So we're dealing with 5 to 10 major corporations that have connections to the rest of the world. So this for me was quite revealing when I was studying this 5 years ago, because I had no idea. No one ever taught me about it. So for me, I thought that I would see different people, they would share different information, but unfortunately not. And it also is across countries. So no country is can't avoid this type of influence unless we obviously have more independent journalism and independent sources of information. And with that, I can also talk a little bit about the difference between when you have independent journalism and you have something called embedded journalism, which is actually journalists that are specifically paid to share specific views of a topic. And so that kind of highlights the fact that people can't be impartial all the time, or can't be actually showing common sense if their paycheck comes from a specific organization that they can't simply avoid, and probably is very frustrating to some of them. And only when certain journalists, only when they reach a certain point in their careers, they're able to actually share what is going on. So there's a lot of what we see and what we read that it's a reflection of the system in itself.
Yeah, that's a great point. We actually have a couple links in our description to a couple documentaries that go into some more detail, showing the points that you're talking about, Joanna, like how, you know, reporters, and some have come forth as whistleblowers in a way to share their experiences and how they've been told or directed or demanded to say or not say certain things in the news, showing that it really is not just a straight case of just news being innocently and honestly reported. Joku, anything to add to what Joanna said here?
Yeah, so I'll touch on the point of the news media specifically being used as a tool for controlling and oftentimes manufacturing public opinion, and why that's important and how that affects us. So a very quick history lesson, we're going to flash back to the Vietnam War in the U.S. Now, one major thing about that was there was overwhelming public disagreement and debate over the issue of whether or not that war was even legitimate or would have even gone to Vietnam. And there was a lot of protests going on. And one of the things that the controlling class very quickly realized was that if you are not managing the public's opinion, you will not have the political support that you need to push through an agenda. So you see very quickly media becomes conglomerate, and it's really interesting the timing as well, because what you start seeing is that major companies start buying up and consolidating, pushing out independent and local media, and over the generations you see these mega corporations taking the place of what media used to be. You start seeing is propaganda everywhere, on every station, giving you the same information, leading you to the exact same conclusion. And you see this happening as soon as we hit the first war with Iraq. I remember when I was a kid, by that time, the propaganda machine was so effective. I remember as a kid, I had trading cards that was about the Desert Storm. So I had Desert Storm trading cards as my first exposure to war. And I thought, hey, these soldiers, and look at these cool cards. Oh, America is great. You never see any of the dissent. You never see public outcry. You never see any of the footage of the real carnage that was being done. And in fact, that's when they started having nonstop war coverage. Coverage is very specific as well, because it's not actually telling you the story or giving you analysis. It's just covering it. You're just there watching it. And watching is controlled and scripted and picked out to lead you to a certain opinion. And ever since then, our media has been a propaganda tool. Ever then, our public opinions, if you'll notice, no matter what channel you turn to, you will always end up finding yourself supporting the war, supporting the president's decisions, supporting whatever agenda the controlling class wants you to support. Why? Because, like I said, they realized very quickly, if you to control and kind of manage the public opinion, you fail to capture the public support. And without that, anytime there's actual dissent, anytime there's actual real human communication about the world as it is and asking questions that are critical to what's being pushed forward, it becomes very hard to push through those agendas. So media as a tool for public control, let's just call it what it is, something that needs to be really looked at and discussed.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Like I said, there's those documentaries that we placed in the description. I believe one is called Manufactured Consent, and the other one is Outfoxed, and go into some details about what Joe is talking about here. So, now that we've laid out a good picture of, what the media has existed as, and I know also from my own personal studies, as Joku was mentioning, going back into history, there's really been a lot of specific propaganda that's been done, and it's all documented. And now that it's like so many years after the fact, now it's like okay to expose it and look at it. So on that note, I'd also like to suggest to our viewers to go, if you really want to see, like if you have some doubt that there's propaganda, I find it's really effective to go to the past and look at some of the older propaganda, because it's a lot more obvious, because it's like it kind of has to evolve over time as we get a little more hip to things, and it becomes more insidious, if you will, and if you go back to the older stuff, it's just so much more apparent, and like, wow, like if you look at some of the back with the Cold War, anti-Russia kind of stuff, and things like that, it kind of really stops you in your tracks, like, wow, that's like so obvious. So I would suggest to investigate those things. So now that we've looked at kind of laying out what the media is and how it functions, why don't we talk a little bit about, what should it really, what is its purpose, what should its purpose really be? What should it really be existing as? Is it something that should be even privately owned, for example? Or is that kind of putting it into a conflict of interest? Who'd like to take this one on?
Well, I will take that one because it's great, Kelly, that you bring up that point, because we always kind of focus on what is wrong, what is not working, because it takes harder to actually think about solutions and what could be and how the media could be. And I am pro communications. Well, I was born already in a century where the internet was starting, and the fact that we can communicate with each other and we have these channels, it's something to kind of be grateful for and to be proud that we as human beings were able to create such as networks where we can communicate with each other and learn with each other. So for me, media and any kind of channel that is able to cross time and boundaries, it must be used as a purpose of educating and evolving who we are, and make sure that we learn from what is actually happening, and we learn from the mistakes. If there have been mistakes, which there are every day when we see they're happening, what can be different? And we should be the ones not accepting that the same news and wars are happening over and over again, because it's exactly the same thing and it's being reported at the exact same time, like copy-paste from history. And what it could be, what it could exist as, is how can we use the existing systems, the structures, the infrastructures and networks to actually make sure that we know what's happening on the other side of the world, or what's happening that needs attention to be solved and moved on, so that we can actually talk about other ways of living. And it means that basically we're living in a constant state of war. War became perpetual. It's a perpetual war, because piece has been not seen as profitable in terms of the whole industry that has not been developed based on that, based on peaceful means, and where actually people can live well and in equality. But if we move on those limitations, which are very kind of going back in time where we don't have the basic needs, but it's actually happening today. So how can we move on from a system of survival that we have lived and we have got used to that into a system of actually becoming the best of us in terms of finding the best solutions, and that it's still a little bit general, just because it's something that we have to imagine. Imagine living in a world where actually the news exists that tells, okay, this is happening, and how can we support that, whatever is happening on that side of the world, or even in our own neighborhoods, to find a solution, an agreement, and that it's solved, and that the news will also show that progress of what's being done. And eventually, we're going to learn about resolution, about coexisting, about actually like successful stories in a way. Obviously, might not be used only for that purpose, but there is so much to learn that we are just distracted by this. Well, it's a kind of a thing in the media, which is the 3 S's, which is sports, scandals, and sex. Those are the 3 major news items that feed into every channel. But what happens if we actually look at our own humanness, or whatever you call it, like what we can do about it? What is a solution for an economic system that can actually support everyone? And we're already doing it. Like these hangouts, for example, these are alternative ways of sharing views from different parts of the world that are actually promoting a better version of ourselves. So I see the potential. We are already living it, but it's just not yet in the mainstream media.
Yeah, great perspectives there. And also, you know, when we look at what the media is, you can kind of look at it in terms of, you know, a sort of information point. Like if you look at the human body and you have like your nervous system, and it's supposed to send the information to tell you like what's going on in your body, you know, shouldn't our media be functioning in the same way as that sort of carrier or conduit for the messages to get to us? And then you can see what happens as a result of getting the wrong messages or getting irrelevant messages, like you were saying, the 3 S's. You know, what's the result of that when we're not informed of what's really happening in the world? Why aren't there big issues, you know, coming up in the news like poverty, and what do we do about it? And, you know, why aren't those kind of things being discussed? Right there shows that there's already a pretty distinct bias, and that it's not actually functioning like it really should be, which kind of brings the question of, you know, why do we have it as privately owned anyway? Joku, anything to add on that?
Yes, in terms of media conglomerations and the ownership of media, this is a really important thing. Because what's happening is news media is kind of on the cross of consumption and needing to make a profit, while at the same time, at its heart, it wants to be what it was intended to be, which is a public service, which is to keep people informed. But you can't do that if, on the one hand, you are depending on the capture market share, capture viewership, sell ad space, sell a particular agenda for those who are backing you and signing your paychecks. This kind of already from the get-go shoots down any attempt to be a real effort to educate, real unbiased effort to present information in a way that it should be digested, which is free of conflict, free of attachment, in a way that people can use to decide and analyze quickly, instead of being pulled to their own conclusions based on what the advertisers want. So with media kind of being on the yoke of having to sell all this profit share, having to sell all this, media advertising, and having to compete for viewership, what we have is this kind of corruption that is going on. And as long as our current system is like that, we're going to see more and more of these mega huge corporations having to, not necessarily wanting to, but having to pander to the biggest possible audience. And the way to do that is to sell easily digestible stories and to fill those 24-hour news cycles with sensationalism, that or press releases or the agendas that are given to them by the people signing their checks. Okay? So as long as we ignore the argument about money system and its current setup, we're not actually going to solve the media problem, because they're interconnected in a way that cannot be separated. So I would actually recommend and prefer more local, publicly owned, not necessarily publicly owned because that kind of has its own connotation, but I would say media owned for and by the people. That can be done locally, so that when something local happens, it can respond immediately. That is its role. It is information that is critical to the community that it serves, and it's immediately digestible, and people can be called into action to respond to their world. At the local, it can still cover all the major, world events and national events, but in the absence of these locally owned, people-owned broadcast systems, what we have left is having to rely on the mega corporations that have to, according to the current system, make a profit at the expense of public education and awareness and spreading actual information that is unbiased.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's kind of like the news, instead of being an information source, has become a commodity in itself, and where, with the living income guaranteed, we see that, things that we depend upon as a necessary, important functioning of a dignified living, such as your basic needs, and the resources that comes from, it would make sense to have those nationalized and not be something that's there for profit, profit gain and to capitalize off of. And I would see that the news would fall under the same category, being that it's such an important, vital part of our larger human organism in terms of informing ourselves, of being aware of what's going on in our world and reality, so that we can respond to it, and respond to it in an educated way where we know what's going on, instead of it being, like you're saying, just this sort of like easily digested, nothing of substance really. So now that we've looked at that aspect, I'd like to take a look a bit more into how do we as individuals then have a critical eye on the news? How do we, within understanding that there's so much bias and control within the media, how do we effectively assist ourselves to sort through that when we're reading a news article or when we're seeing something on TV? What's some of the things that we can apply, that we can see when there's a bias going on, or how do we, what do we do there? So who wants to start us off on that?
So Kelly, I will give an example, which is on Facebook. Like these days, you might not even read the newspaper on the tube or in your like on the cafe, at the cafe, but you actually read the news on Facebook. And I've been noticing that there's more and more these hoaxes stories where you see a picture and someone adds a text on it, and then they send it to everybody, and people's just starting distributing it randomly without actually reading. And there was this picture which was like dead bodies, and it was associating, I think it was actually against an Islam group, and it was actually against Islamism. And I searched for that because I found just too odd to have such a, like, these images associated, like, so it was a really bad attack. And obviously I search. There's like already websites where you can search for stories. There's one which is called groups.com, or there's various websites that you can search for stories to just verify how true they are. And obviously it wasn't. Actually, that image of dead bodies had been a gas explosion in an African country, and then they simply match. They put a content and an image, and there you go. You have a news story. So that kind of critical approach, it's our responsibility. When you get something in front of you, before you share it, either it's like it might be a message that you resonate with or not, but regardless, just do your own bit of information. It may take 5 minutes, it may take half an hour, but you make sure that whatever you share, you are responsible for it. Because in the big news, it's the same thing. An editor must be responsible for the news that he allows or not allowed to come out. So also suppressing information is a form of censorship, a form of control. So that is something that I have been doing myself and try to assist other people. When I see that they share something that it's simply not true, it's kind of, hey, watch out, like do your homework, because it will actually assist in other ways of life. Because if we are distracted with this type of news, that can be, it's also a reflection of how we maybe are distracted in other ways and other things in our lives. So that kind of awareness, it makes us, we are our own critical eyes, so that whenever news come to us, we don't take it at face value, and we learn how to actually read upon it. And if it's a topic that is really relevant to me, I would continue that investigation. I will search for authors that have been writing on that topic, search for documentaries, and there you might even find a topic that you can really connect with, and you may write your own blog on it. So you create your own network of sources, and you make sure that the information that goes out, your input and output, it's in harmony with the research that you have done.
Yeah, great points. Joku, anything to add on that?
No, that was excellent, Joanna. I really just want to build on that. That's great. And on the point of responsibility, let's really bring that down to the individual level here. Okay, let's say that, like Joanna's example, come across a news story on Twitter or Facebook or whatever medium or channel. You come across a news story and you decide to share it. Well, if you check the facts of the story yourself, if you don't look at who's writing it, what the spin is, what kind of information is in it, whether or not it's been fact-checked, you personally are responsible for every single person that comes into contact with that piece of information, because you spread it. And you're responsible for every person that they share it to, and they share it to. And you see how this snowballs. And it's not comfortable to sit with this responsibility. That's kind of scary, right? Because people are going to be making decisions, and they're allowing themselves to trust you because you did that piece of information. And they're allowing that information to influence their decision making. And that has ramifications for their lives in ways that you may not see now. You are responsible in that very moment that you click share on an article that you didn't yourself vet and check. Now, I'm not saying to do this for every single piece, but you can look at, where is this information coming from? What is the story that it's telling, and does it check out? And before you on with it and trust it, you should do your due diligence as a member of our society. It is your duty to be the kind of person that you want our organizations to be. You should be the fact checker. You should be the reporter. And it's interesting, isn't it, that we have this idea that our news agents should be trusted. One example I like to bring in very quickly is Fox News in the U.S. likes to brand itself as America's most trusted news source. Well, news shouldn't be trusted. News isn't about trust. We shouldn't have to trust. We should be always critical. We should always be inquisitive and ask and demanding that facts be accurate. That is the news. We don't want to be turning into a society that is just trusting everything that we see, because why we are so misinformed. That is why it's so easy to pull the wool over our eyes. We blindly trust any sign of authority, any sign of that something might be accurate, and if you present it as though it is, we just go along with it. That needs to stop at the individual level. So just off of what Joanne already brought up about the point of responsibility when looking at news, it starts with yourself. And I highly encourage everybody to take this to heart.
Yeah, that's a great point in that, we have a big responsibility when it comes to sharing the news, and that, we can't criticize or blame the news industry if we ourselves aren't going to take that responsibility. And within that, it means taking the time to apply one's own critical thinking skills and to evaluate the information that's in front of you, and to, even in a way learn, what is the difference between an assumption and a fact. When you read something and it gives you a certain stance about something or opinion about something, look at the information. Is there a fact? Is it based on facts? We have to check these things instead of just kind of placing our trust in the source of the information and just going along with what's said. We have to learn to recognize and identify these biases within ourselves to be able to sort through our own BS, if you will, to even get through what's being presented to us. So, and within this, I found an important point for myself that I apply when reading the news or listening to news or anything really, is recognizing when do I know something is based on facts and when don't I, and then if there's something that if a statement is made or a claim is made and I don't know that that's based on facts, either I'm going to go and do the research and find out, and if I don't have the time or if I'm not going to or not able to, I have to let that go. I don't know that it's true or not. So a big important tactic that I've used is letting go of what you don't know, because otherwise, if you hold on to it, you might be holding on to an assumption that isn't correct, and then you're going to go out and influence others in your life by the information that you present that you didn't fact check yourself. So it comes back to that point of responsibility. So now that we've looked at the individual perspective, I'd like to look at quickly, as we're coming to the end here, how could a living income guaranteed affect this issue with the media? Who wants to take that one?
I'll jump in on this one. So we briefly touched on this earlier in the conversation about how we have to consider the current economic and monetary setup of the world that we have now, because that affects not only the news media but every industry. It's interesting when we look at me specifically here, because there is a will and a desire for people to kind of own their own media and to be able to put out the kind of that they want to be receiving. People want to be journalists that have integrity. People want to put on quality programs that they want to watch, and they would be proud to. But the barrier to that is funding. The barrier to that is having to compete for the space to do in, because all of that is currently owned and private, and there is no entry point for somebody that is not willing to play the game for profit. So when it comes to a living income guaranteed, in terms of having a system where profit is not the starting point for venture, when we have a system where you are putting out the best because it is the best, and that by itself is a worthy enough time, then I can't even imagine what that looks like. We've never had that. And I think that can be incredible, but that can't happen unless and until, I think, we address the issue of money. When major corporations have to make a profit in order to keep that news agency functioning, let alone putting out good material. Just for it to function, it has to compete in an arbitrarily scarce system that makes no sense, other than the fact that it's trying to prop up this fake money system that we currently have. So an equal money system is kind of the magic bullet we've been waiting for. It addresses all of those core issues, and it allows us to actually build what we want. And the good thing is we have the infrastructure now. Like I said, there is the will, there is that determination to do these things as human beings. Our only barrier right now is the current economic setup.
Yeah, Joker, it's like once in a league system, we would actually kind of, by taking ownership of the media, of what's being said, it's also us questioning our own leadership, our own values, what we accept and what we don't accept. And what I see as well, once we move in a system where actually people own the news, and they are the ones that are also as a reference point of what's being said and what being said, it's also, many conflicts will end. It's simply like that, because the majority of the conflicts that we see in the news as this perpetual war, it's based on the fight for resources and the fight for what the haves and have-nots. And once all of that system goes down, then all the content that for the time being has been suppressed because there's simply not enough time to cover together with all these conflicts that are going on, then we're going to see much better things about who we are, about our potential, and also a lot of truth that has never come out in terms of what is actually going on, what needs to be addressed, what are the problems, and what are the solutions. And this takes me to a point that I just wanted to mention it quickly, which is the current situation. And you were actually mentioning earlier, I think it was Joe, on the use, for example, of propaganda, and in the past was communism. And when the American public and the international public thought that there will be no bigger threat than communism as the amount of attention that took, suddenly Islam became the new buggers, and all the media is just about terrorism and all of these stories. And this is the kind of awareness that we as human beings living in this point in time, we are responsible to what we accept going on to the news. So if it becomes our responsibility, we own it, we are going to make sure that it's in alignment with our values. And the reality is that the majority of people is not pro-war. The majority of people don't want to live in war. So that's why, and that's why we have this small group of media owners controlling the rest, because it's like against what the majority wants. So I think bringing this point onto our own awareness, which is not accepting what is currently the normalization of paranoia, which is what it is like we accept the unthinkable because the news, that's a way of selling more and taking the profit, putting profits in first as instead of our own well-being as society. We are destroying our future generations if we don't stop. So it's like we don't have choice here. Either we continue with the system where the few control many, or we just stand at a point of equality. We're all here in the same boat. We better take care of each other and not starting to say lies about each other and creating the separation that will only bring further consequence. So that is something that I've thought of bringing up to us. And the final thing as well, which with League we're also bringing about, that is our own empowerment as human beings, as citizens, to decide, okay, how can we participate? And some of us will be great writers and can participate. Some of us will be great at other things, but do not take away our responsibility that is already here. And therefore, we don't need any media experts to tell us what to think. We will be able to educate ourselves, to think, to share, to ask questions. And with the system that we already have, the information channels, we now can ask somewhere else in the other country, hey, I see this in the news. Is this happening? And you probably, it's not like that. What's happening in television, in that screen, is just like a dot as part of the bigger picture that usually has nothing to do with what's really going on. So just ask questions to those that are in there. Your friends, your family, your people that are on site, and we'll be able to give you first-hand experiences, and then you take your initiative to write upon it and to even challenge the authors of articles that might not be the best. So yeah, it's up to us.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, when you take now in this day and age when we have the internet and we're able to connect in such a way across the world with other people and get first-hand accounts of what's going on, you can there really clearly see the discrepancy that's going on in terms of what is being broadcast as news in one country compared to another country, and you've got different stories, and that really makes it apparent, like, okay, you know, we're not getting the straight scoop here. And you know, with the Living Income Guaranteed, what's great about that is that, you know, as we discussed earlier with, you know, how reporters in the media, you know, it's about them doing a job, it's about them making a paycheck, and if that paycheck is threatened, you know, if they don't say what they need to say, they're going to lose their job, and so they're going to say what they're told to say. But with Living Income Guaranteed, when you have an income that doesn't have to be tied to your labor, that frees you up to be able to say, no, I don't agree with that, because like you're saying, Joanna, most of us aren't for war and don't agree with that. I mean, I remember it was very strange to me, speaking about Desert Storm earlier and the playing cards and such. I do remember that, and I also had a father who was in the Air Force, and he went to Desert Storm, and I just remember that's when it hit me at that time. I was pretty young, and that's when it hit me like, wow, you know, I learned about wars in school, but they're still happening, for real, now. Like, this is weird, you know, like you would have thought that was something that we got over in the past, you know. So, and I'm sure I've spoken to many who had the same kind of experience as I did when they found out that this still happens, and so I know that this is not, you know, war isn't a natural thing. When you look at the propaganda and the information that's presented, like for example with communism, with the Cold War, and now it's Islam, you can see that these biases are actually manufactured, and it's you know, on us to believe in it. You know, maybe our neighbor did something we don't like, and they're Islamists, and so now we hate Islam. You know, it's like we have to recognize where we in ourselves take on these biases and participate them and make them real, when actually we're just being, it's just what we're being fed from the current media industry. So it's up to us and our personal responsibility to sort that out and realize that, like you're saying, Joanna, if we keep going at this rate, it's going to mean our own destruction, and it's already meaning our own world wrought with all sorts of problems that we don't want to be living with. So as we wrap up this hangout, is there any final words anyone would like to share?
No, Kelly, I think we covered
All right.
Lots of points.
Yeah.
Perhaps what we're going to do is we're going to add just some links to some documentaries that I found are really helpful, and it was helpful for me to know a little bit more about this topic.
Yeah, definitely we will add links to the description that I suggest everyone to check out, as I found them very helpful also in my process of learning how to get a critical eye on the news. So that's going to do it for this hangout, and we will see everyone in our next hangout coming soon. Bye.